Hello everyone, I'm Kunjal. I'm a psychotherapist. I've been practicing since the last 4 to 5 years. I have a master's in psychology and another master's in psychotherapy and counseling. And I'm really happy to be here and talking about my favorite subject, which is psychotherapy. And basically, I feel that especially now, there is so many psychotherapies that are available with so many different names. I think it can get quite confusing for somebody who's not that well versed with the subject. So what kind of problems do you have, and for what kind of problems you go to what kind of therapist, that itself is quite a painstaking journey if there is less awareness on the subject. So continuing from what doctor was saying, the awareness is of extreme importance for two reasons, mainly for prevention. Like when we read articles in the newspaper and we find that okay, a woman and a child has committed suicide, or something as drastic as that, or like again sticking to the subject of suicide, like say a student is giving examination and just the night before, I've heard of such cases wherein an engineering student just jumped out of the window, couldn't handle that stress. Now these may sound very drastic, but all these things, they have old precursors. There is a lot of susceptibility that a person has, the kind of ways a person looks at things. So at that point of time, coming back to what he was saying, a general physician, your family doctor is in the best opportune position wherein he can trace these things, like suddenly there is a child or a patient who is suddenly withdrawn. I mean, these are very classic symptoms which we can misread it as something else. But at that point of time, if a person is referred that yes, not to get into a football thing, but at that point of time it becomes very important that please meet with a psychologist or get the necessary information from Wikipedia, for example. Now what is this unconscious mind and why are we talking about it? I mean, Freud, has the father of psychology, has put it very nicely, very interestingly, that you see the top portion of the iceberg, that is our conscious mind. That is where we are aware of things, that this is what I'm going through, this is the kind of help that I want to seek, etc., etc. But interestingly, what he has to say is, our mind is consisting of a big chunk, which is the unconscious mind, which is below the water level. Now what happens there, we really don't know, we are not aware of it. Sometimes we get some material from it, say during hypnosis, or when we are extremely relaxed. It will be very interesting to find out old childhood recollections from as young as when we were 3 years old. Now, but why are we studying it? If it's unconscious and we are not remembering it, then why do we study it? We'll come to that. What Freud talks about is how he discusses mind in terms of id, ego and superego. Now the id is being the very impulsive, very animalistic part, wherein I have this craving, I want to jump in water, I want to do this, I want to do that. It's that part within us. Then there's another part, which is a superego. So the superego is basically how we need to, the way we need to survive in a society, in a culture. That okay, these are the do's and these are the don'ts. You can't do things this way and you got to do things this way. So obviously there is going to be a fight between the id and the superego. Let me illustrate. Say you have a very bad day at work and the boss is really getting angry on you and you find it's really without enough reason for it. And the boss has come over to your cabin, shouted at you, gotten very angry and stuff. And there is that id part of you which really wants to blast out and say, hello, you can't do this, just I want to really tell my boss, get off. Just get off my case and get lost. But the superego tells us that no, you cannot do that. You want the job or no, you can't do that. So what do? That's where the ego comes in. The ego comes in to calm the id down, because the id is also within you, it wants to satisfy it, and it also wants to calm the superego down, because that is also within you. So what it does is, it fools your mind, or manipulates your mind. That conscious part, the conscious part in the top, it fools it. What does it do is it employs something called as defense mechanisms. Defense mechanism, I'll give the example with the boss scenario, is displacement. what would happen here is, a classic example would be that the ego will find ways wherein you can find excuses to get your anger out in front of people that you can get your anger out on. So, say for example, you come back home and you feel that, okay, you can get angry on your wife safely without getting too much in trouble. So that's called displacement. Yeah, he's smiling. Yeah, all of us do it, right? But that's the point of it, that we have to use it. If we don't want to go mad thinking, because it is at one end and the superego is right at the other extreme, we have to strike a balance. So we have to use defense mechanisms. But that's when Freud has, he's the first person to start psychotherapy with psychoanalysis. That's wherein he says that too much of it, as we can obviously, I mean, we can't keep getting angry on other people for things that they've not done. For example, I'm giving a very simple example here. So psychotherapy can really help over there, wherein we are using too many defense mechanisms. And if we're using too less defense mechanisms, it becomes very hard to deal with the complexities and the dualities that we will feel within us. That, bhai, I'm feeling this also and I'm feeling that also, I'm feeling torn apart. Now, how does this come about in cases when they come to counseling psychologists, say for example? I'll give an illustration. I got a case for a 4-year-old, a very small, very cute girl. The mother would come to me and she was like, I'm not able to understand, I'm not able to help her better. She keeps crying, that's the only way she talks to me. I don't know what to do, I'm having a lot of behavioral problems with her. But that's when slowly we talked and we reached to a point wherein we found out that it was her unconscious, the mother's unconscious, that the child had picked up on. To go a little in detail, when she was 4 years old, when the mother was 4 years old, that time her younger sibling was born. And the whole feeling that I'm not special enough had started within the mother. And when she saw her 4-year-old daughter, unconsciously, which she's already forgotten, she doesn't know all this. This comes out in therapy. So at that point of time, she started relating with that feeling that I was not being accepted the way I wanted it, in a very irrational, in a very id way. That she started projecting onto the child, throwing it right onto the child by feeling very irritated with the child and not knowing why. Why? Because she ended up facing the things which were painful to her when she was 4 years old and she had forgotten about it. Now, coming back to the unconscious mind, you all may wonder, do we actually have all these memories? Yes and no. Consciously, we do not have that much of capacity to remember all this. That's wherein the defense mechanism had played a role, so that we forget the 4-year-old incident and we move on in life. But things in life, as we move on ahead, make us come face to face with things that have been unresolved in our own past. And there has to be a timing for it. Like you very rightly said, that everything is not an emergency. There comes a point in time wherein you have to deal with certain things which you've not dealt before. If we don't deal with it, we face problems. So what we are saying is, problems are in ways, whether they are physical or psychological. Now we'll stick to psychological. Problems which are psychological or behavioral oriented are signals for us that there is something that if we look into, we'll feel more freer and we'll be able to live. Like he said, it gives us time. It buys us time so that we are in this moment, we are able to decide what we want to do, how we want to live better. It gives us that freedom. Now, we've understood where the psychotherapy thing comes in action. That how we understand defense mechanisms, so we are able to take better decisions today, which are not so grossly, like the unconscious is like a driver. It's made your whole gadi ka trip decided that you are going to go here, and it keeps on fooling the conscious. That the conscious keeps feeling I'm going to Vile Parla East. And the unconscious is actually driving you towards VT. Then you land up in VT and you're wondering how the hell did that happen. It's a simple metaphor. So that's how psychotherapy can help us understand why you chose to go to VT for that illustration. Now, what psychotherapy is not. It's not advice giving. It's not at all that. A lot of us feel that. Let me ask you all, what do you all feel is psychotherapy or counseling? Whatever your ideas are. Yeah. Okay. Draw the answers from within is what you're saying? It has to come from within. What? That's where the root is. Okay. To put it in another example, like say all of us have goals in life. We want to reach somewhere. My goal is different from yours. Your goal is different from mine. I can judge and say, okay, yaar, it's an easy thing. Kar lo na, why is it so difficult? And you can say the same thing for mine. But the point over here is, to each one of us, our goal is like Mount Everest. The journey could be adventurous. The journey could be challenging. The journey could be painful. It could be anything. So at that point of time, if you have some assistance, that is where psychotherapy comes in. Having said that, there are various forms of psychotherapy. So extremely severe cases, like if you are seeing things that do not exist, so that's an extension of your imagination which goes into, say, psychosis. Then you cannot go to a counselor or a counseling psychologist who's practicing Rogerian counseling. It's a technical term, but most counseling psychologists follow that pattern. Then you need to go to either a psychotherapist or a much more severe, much more intense therapy, and in touch with the psychiatrist. So that's one. But you asked, is psychotherapy for everyone? Then yes, the answer is yes. It depends what you want in life. And having said that, psychotherapy is not the only form. There are so many different ways. You have to choose what path suits you. There are insight-oriented approaches, there are action-oriented approaches. Okay, this is my problem, I have found out that, say for example, I'm not able to quit smoking, as simple as that, or I'm not able to let go of my anger issues, or for some reason I'm feeling very depressed and I don't know why. Then for these things, insight-oriented approaches help a lot, but for getting out of there, you will need to learn and unlearn habits. Learn what habits you are in, what cycles and patterns that you are unconsciously driven to, and then relearn some new ones. So that's your action-oriented approaches. What I just mentioned about action-oriented things, which help us change the way we behave, change the way we think, after finding out what the problem is. That's when brief behavior and cognitive therapy help. Now I've given a very generic, very vague term, because in today's market, there are so many terminologies. I would suggest, just like him, that approach it in a very business-like fashion. You develop rapport, you develop it. You don't go with blind faith or obedience to anybody, would be my personal suggestion. So you go to that person, ask them what kind of therapy are you offering, how am I going to be treated, at the end of the treatment, how different am I going to be? And just see what kind of answers you are receiving, see how you feel, and make your own call. There is no, one therapist is not the same as the other. Over here, I like to joke about it, the number of problems that we have, exactly corresponding to that, we have that many kinds of therapies. It's that vast. Because psychology is still budding. It's not as advanced and as old as, let's say, an Ayurveda or even allopathy. No. It's relatively newer, but it has lots of promising things are happening. So over here, the basic distinguish between CBT and REBT and therapies of this nature is that we are aware of it and we are working on our actions. To give you a very interesting example, there was this 6-year-old who was very afraid of going to school. So for one entire year, she skipped school. Like, she would go to school one day, she would not go another. She was very intelligent, very cute, very loving. If you would see her, you'd be like, why is she having this problem? There was no apparent tension at home. There was no threat in school. There was no abuse pattern. There was no normal preconditions that were there. After a bit of insight-oriented therapy, we learned that somewhere she might have picked up on the mother's insecurities, because the father had moved out of the town for, say, a couple of months in a year. There was a new job. And somewhere the mother didn't even realize that her insecurity was being passed on. Her stress was being passed on to the child. So the child somewhere wanted to stay only with the mother at all times. Now the child consciously doesn't know that that is what she is doing. She loved going to school, but then she had no reason why she stopped going. So then we used the behavioral technique. After finding out that yes, we ruled out all the other possibilities, and then we started treating her, and we did something as fun as every day she would move one step closer towards the school. So how would we do that? One day she would wear her school uniform and wear fancy shoes. So she knows for sure that she is not going to be dragged to school. Every morning she would get up and she would vomit. So slowly that stopped, because that she wore her school uniform, and while wearing the uniform we played, we watched television. So the anger, the fear and कि मुझे स्कूल लेके जाएंगे, that threat, that went away, because she's not associating her school uniform with fear. She's associating it with fun. So slowly it took us a few months to finally get her to go to school. And the good news is that now she's actually the class monitor, and the last I heard she was even bullying a few children, but she's having a good time, and she has moved on from one phase to another using this kind of therapy. Do you all have questions regarding this therapy? Not yet. This comes to the other polarity. We have long-term insight-oriented therapies. Relatively, the behavior therapies are shorter in duration, so it's cost-effective also. And as we can see it in the picture, the insight-oriented therapies is exactly as how you described it, that you get insight into your own self just by getting a particular kind of relationship with the therapist, and the kind of environment which is very unique to two friends talking with each other. It's very unique from that. And it gets solved over here in terms of the root core issue.